Hey guys, it's Kevin here to review Volume 1 of Stranger Things Season 4. And this season, after the events of Season 3, all of our characters have pretty much split up. They are all in different locations, and everyone's kind of going through their own dilemmas, but a new threat kind of looming throughout Hawkins kind of starts to maybe bring everyone back together, and that's really all I can say. And this season, I was ecstatic for. Look, Stranger Things has very quickly become, like, one of my favorite shows to talk about since Season 1. I have just absolutely been loving this show, and it's one of those shows where, you know, whenever someone tries to tell me, oh, it's played out, they always find ways to, like, reinvent themselves, and that's something that I was very excited to see within Season 4. It's been a long time since we've had Stranger Things, especially because of, you know, COVID and whatnot. We were supposed to get this in, like, 2020, but because of the fact that, you know, everything went down there, this was put in the back burner. They've been releasing, like, little teasers in anticipation every single week. Not every single week, but, like, every few months. And eventually, early this year, we did get confirmation that we were getting Season 4. It's happening, and we were getting it in 2 chunks, which I was definitely very excited about because I love when Netflix is trying out different models. I've been saying this for years, that they very much should be, and I feel like Stranger Things is the show that they need to do that with. It's easily the most popular show. I think it's, like, the one show they have that, like, has, like, this built-in fan base, and I think if they really wanted to, like, test the waters, I feel like Stranger Things is the one to do that with. So I was very excited to see how the season was going to deliver, and my God, this season, look, of course we're only talking about Volume 1, but this is a very, very bold and daring season of television than what has come before. It's so much more grandiose. It is a lot darker than what we've seen, and it's easily, I mean, if they keep up the momentum here, it could very possibly become their best season yet, but we are just going to get into it right now. So, of course, we do have to start off talking about the cast here, and look, what else can I say when it comes to the cast of actors that I haven't? I think Stranger Things just has one of the best ensembles within TV, and everyone just does such a incredible job. Let's first talk about Winona Ryder. You know, Joyce, she is, of course, kind of the main character of this show. I will say this season, there isn't as much to say about her, but it is really great to see Joyce and her trying to recover as best as she can from the events of Season 3 and Hopper's death and whatnot, or his supposed death, because we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you know, I really like her this season. I think she always just does such a great job, bringing so much heart and a natural emotion to this character that you just can't help but latch onto. You also love whenever Joyce is happy, you know, her trying to stay as happy as she possibly can, even if you can tell that she's definitely not over some things that happened, you know, a few months ago. I just really love what she always brings to the table as this character. But David Harbour, we really got to talk about here, because Season 3, you know, the way they ended things, I pretty much thought that Hopper was a goner, the way they wrote things off, and I was content with that. And if you guys remember, when they first announced that Hopper was coming back to this show, I was kind of enraged because I just felt like they gave him such a perfect death. You know, they'd ended in such a satisfying manner. I didn't really see the need for him to return, but he very much does return here, and I'll get more into how I feel about that plot line a little bit later, but what I will say is it definitely does give David Harbour some real emotional material to deal with here. We've really never seen Hopper put through the ringer like he is this season, and as such, Harbour gets to deliver some really heavy stuff. He has one really great monologue that I think a lot of people are really going to be talking about, and it reminds us why Harbour is definitely one of the best parts of this show. You know, again, we'll get more into whether or not I think it was like necessary to bring him back, but you know, speaking to his performance, Harbour still really crushes this role. He doesn't miss a beat. Millie Bobby Brown, though, we gotta talk about, because for me, she is always the big standout of pretty much every season, and this season 11 really goes through a lot of shit. You know, as we know, she no longer has her powers, and with that, 11 is in a much more vulnerable state this season. She can't really rely on them as much as she normally does, and we really do see her kind of become this outcast of sorts, and her having to kind of like push through that, but also get a bit more exploration of, you know, her origins and what's really happened to her, and it gives Brown a much performance. She doesn't have a ton of dialogue this season. There are a lot of moments where you're just kind of watching her facial expressions, but you really can see, you know, what this has done to her as a character, because this is something this character has very much repressed, a lot of what we're seeing in this season. But Brown just does such an amazing job, I think, propelling this character forward. I really love what she ended up doing this season. She always just completely just blows me away every time she's on screen, and that is definitely no different when it comes to this season overall. And of course, all the regular actors are still really great here. Like Finn Wolfhard, I think, is still really good as Mike. I've heard some people say that, like, he doesn't seem as invested in this role. I definitely felt like he still was doing a good job of what he was giving. Gaten Matarazzo is always a big standout as Dustin, always so fun to watch, and is given a bit more of a leadership role this time, and I think he really does a great job with that. McLaughlin, very good as Lucas, who's in a very interesting storyline this season. I like what they did with him a lot. Noah Schnapp is always a really big standout out here. I think he definitely does do some really great work. But I gotta say, for me, maybe the standout of this entire season, actually, no, it's not up for debate. She is the standout of this entire season, is none other than Sadie Sink, who does play Max. And I've always enjoyed this character a lot. I've always thought Sink did a really good job in this role. But trust me when I say she's never really had the material that she's been given this season. Max goes in a very interesting direction, especially after what's happened to her in the previous season. It allows her to go through a very different arc. She's changed a lot as a person, socially, in terms of her mannerisms, in terms of the way she's carried herself. She's a lot more closed off, and there's a lot that Max is really dealing with here, and it really gives her that chance to kind of take the spotlight a bit from everyone else, and I really did love getting to see that. I feel like we really do get to see Sink's talent, specifically in the 4th episode of the show. She really does give some amazing work here. I just absolutely love what she ended up doing. It was such a raw and natural performance, and really just brought out so much out of Sink that we have seen before, but never in the way we do here. She really kind of does walk away with, I think, maybe the entire season. I was just so impressed by her work here. Again, it's just... It's such a emotional performance, but it's one you just really do find yourself gravitating towards. And I think after the season, I can very much say Sink is by far one of the most talented actors in this entire show. I just loved what she ended up doing here, and she alone, I think, is enough a reason to watch this season for sure. But the rest of the cast also does some really great work here. You know, Natalia Dyer is always really good as Nancy. Joe Keery is always fantastic as Steve. I love this character so much, and he still does some excellent work this season. Maya Hawke is Robin. I was a little bit worried that she was going to get a bit sidelined this season, but she very much doesn't. She's still huge standout here. Love what she does. She's very fun to watch this season. Has a really fun dynamic with both Steve, but also with Nancy, and I thought that she was just a lot of fun to watch here. I liked what she ended up doing. Brett Gelman has a much bigger role this season. He's a main character now, and he definitely provides some really fun moments. Priah Ferguson as Erica, but I gotta say, the other 2 big standouts of this season for me, one of them is Jamie Campbell Bower. I can't say much more than that, but he plays a character that we see in mostly flashbacks. I can't really say much more than that without delving into spoilers, but he is phenomenal this season. I love what they end up doing with him. I think that he is a really big standout. He has some moments that you truly are never going to forget. But another really big standout and an excellent addition to the show is Joseph Quinn as Eddie Munson. Shows up and he feels a little bit too over the top, maybe a little bit too campy, but he very quickly settles into this role as this character that you really do find yourself sympathizing with, because he's kind of being blamed for all of the crazy shit that's going down within Hawkins, and I just really loved his character. I felt like he fit so well into the main ensemble here, and he became a big standout for me throughout this entire season. Really just the entire cast. Everyone really does do some great work here. I really was just impressed by everyone, as usual. But now we got to get to the directing and the writing, which let's talk about the directing for this season, because like I said, it's much different than previous seasons. Now, yes, previous seasons did hint at darkness. They hinted at more of this horror direction, but this season really does embrace that. It feels like, because of the fact that all of these kids have now grown up, they are very much transitioning into adulthood. You know, they're going into high school and things like that. You know, some of the kids are in their senior year of high school. It it feels like the show wanted to grow up with it, and with that comes a much darker and much more utilized tone in that way. I mean, this season, everything just feels so much more dire, everything just feels so much more grim, and you're never really sure where it's going to go, and that's something I really did appreciate with the Duffer brothers here. At this point, it would be very easy for them to kind of just do the same thing, but they don't. They take a lot of chances this season, and that's something that I just really appreciate. You can tell they put a lot of effort into trying to make this season feel as distinct from its previous entries as possible, and I think it very much did end up paying off in the end. I really loved what they ended up doing here for sure. Now, don't get me wrong, like the wittiness and the charm, it's still very much there. There are a lot of funny moments throughout this season, but there definitely is a much larger focus placed on the horror, and I generally was very unnerved throughout a good majority of this season. I really liked what they ended up doing, but also the interpersonal drama with these characters, they still focus a lot on that, and I think just the Duffer brothers directing, this may be their most impressive season yet, just because of how much they are willing to take so many chances, but still make it feel like the same show. It doesn't feel like this show has evolved into something completely different. It still feels like Stranger Things. It's just a much different, it's just a much larger scope in terms of what we're dealing with here, and that's something that I really did appreciate. But also the writing for this season, I think, is also very impressive, because obviously, you know, you've heard from all the reviews, and they've kind of hinted it, this season is a lot more dense in terms of its storytelling. I mean, throughout most of the season, we're dealing with 3, sometimes 4 or 5 different locations, and if handled wrong, it could end up very convoluted, very messy, but none of the sort really does happen here. I feel like they did a really good job in taking their time with each of these locations, but also putting their own unique spin on all of them. And I'm going to get more into that when I get to the spoilers, but what I will say is all 3 of these locations are very interesting to watch. When we are in the California side of things, you know, we're really given this look at 11 and seeing her try to be normal, something that we really haven't seen before. She now has to acclimate to this new human society of sorts where she has to be normal. She doesn't have her powers, and it makes for a much more emotional arc for her. I mean, she really goes through so much this season. And it's not to say she hasn't before, but this season, I mean, this is such a brutal season for 11, whether it be her, like I said, trying to survive a high school environment and having to, even if she isn't, you know, socially aware of how to, you know, conduct herself and things like that, because she's never really had that time to do that, or when she eventually has to unpack some really painful memories involving her origins. This is easily the most in-depth look we have ever gotten at 11's past yet. We've gotten some details before, and they've given us some hints of what's going on, but this season, we really do get into the nitty-gritty of what she really did go through, what has made 11 who she really is today. You know, who was she before she was, you know, with Will, with Joyce, going under the name, you know, Jane and things like that. Who really was she? And I think this season does a really good job with all of that, and I found myself just so invested in what they were doing with her as a character, like, not just because of how much I love Millie Bobby Brown, but also because of the season's worth of development we've gotten with her. I mean, they really do a great job when it comes to 11 this season. I was very impressed by all that. The rest of the California subplot, though, eventually does turn into something else, and I will talk about that when we get into spoilers, but I will say there is a good portion of it that kind of turns into this kind of like, it kind of turns into this buddy comedy of sorts, and I did appreciate them trying to do that because of just how heavy so much of this season is. It did feel like it was this lighter sort of departure that we needed. It kind of feels like this palate cleanser of sorts. I'll get more into how, you know, what's really going on and things like that, but I thought they did a pretty good job when it came to that storyline overall. I don't really have too many complaints there. The other big portion of the season, the biggest diversion, I would say, is when we get to Russia within this season. Again, I can't really say anything about what's going on there, but I will say it involves Hopper, and this was a storyline that I was honestly pretty conflicted on. I didn't really know how to feel about it. I honestly still don't know how to feel about it, and I feel like this is something that will probably hopefully get improved within Volume 2. But what I will say is it is definitely very different from what we have seen before. It's much more like action-oriented and things like that. And I think that David Harbour does give a strong performance, but I am kind of questioning whether or not it was necessary to bring him back for this specific storyline. That's just something I'm very unsure of. There are a lot of just repetitive and drawn-out scenes that I don't really feel like needed to be throughout the course of 7 episodes. I feel like you could have condensed it to just like 3 episodes, but it's stretched out, and it's easily I think the most puzzling of the storylines this season. It's the one where I'm just not really sure how this is going to connect to anything. Is this something that we really needed? I'm just unsure how to really feel about all of that. But easily the most interesting stuff, and I think the stuff that is really going to leave the biggest impact, happens within Hawkins. And my God, there is so much that is going on here, whether it be all of our characters and the different directions that they're going in. I mean, like I said, these characters are in high school now, and it brings about a very different dynamic. You have characters like Lucas, for example, who has become this athlete of sorts, and he's kind of at a point where he has to make a choice. He is, hanging out with his regular friends, but his friends are not exactly, part of the popular crowd, and he kind of has to make this decision as to whether or not he wants to stick with them or not. And I thought that was a very interesting storyline that they ended up dealing with this season. But like I said, it's Max that you really do find yourself gravitating towards here when it comes to everything they do with her, how she's dealing with Billy's death. She's become a lot more she's become a lot more reclusive because of that. She has become a lot more kind of closed off. She is often wearing headphones and listening to, the same Kate Bush song over and over again. And her whole story is so interesting to watch. Again, one, because we've never really gotten this much focus on Max before, but it's also what they really do with her. I just found so deeply impactful. There's so many interesting directions they take this character in that really hints at her, I think, becoming one of the best characters of this entire show. I really loved what they ended up doing with her this season. But the other thing that really does keep this season intriguing is that we have a whole new big bad that we're dealing with here. The Mind Flayer was defeated at the end of Season 3. You can't just have the Mind Flayer continually coming back. So instead, we're dealing with the presence of this entity known as Vecna. And Vecna is very different than anything we've dealt with before, mainly because Vecna is sentient. Vecna is able to communicate with these characters. It's able to manipulate them in a way that we haven't seen before. And my God, with the inclusion of this entity, this show is just so much more horrifying to watch. And I mean it when I say this show is scary. There are so many sequences with this creature that you truly are never gonna forget. And I was just so impressed by the levels they ended up going, but also the mystery of Vecna is so intriguing to watch because you really want to know, like, what is the goal of this entity? What are they really trying to do? What's really going on there? Vecna is someone who seems to feed off of, like, insecurities and things like that, but what really is the end goal? And also what is, the origins of this character? That's something we really do dive deep into, and with that, we kind of assemble this whole crew of sorts, and it's kind of similar to the crew we got in Season 3, but it's a little bit more extended this time around. You still have Dustin, Steve, and Robin teaming up, but then you also have Max and Nancy and Lucas also in on the mix, and that whole group was just so fun to watch. There's so many fun dynamics going on there, whether it's this great bond between Nancy and Robin, this very unexpected friendship that we get, which ended up being one of the highlights of the season for me. I love what they end up doing with the two of them, but also throwing Max into all of it. Again, it brings about this new dynamic that I just really enjoyed throughout the season. And Eddie as well as a character, he eventually gets involved. He becomes easily, I think, one of the characters that people are going to gravitate towards the most, because he's someone who at first just kind of seems like your typical like bad boy, you know, drives a motorcycle, has this whole like, you know, cult of sorts that he may be involved in, but you quickly realize how much of a victim this character really is, and how he's being painted in this very unfair light. And I really liked what they ended up doing with him overall. Again, I thought he really did blend in with this ensemble very well. So like I said, there's a lot going on in terms of writing this season. There's a lot of different locations that we venture through, but at no point did I feel like they're doing too much. At no point did I feel like there's too much going on here. It all just felt so natural, the way we would, you know, go from one location to the next. It just felt like it flowed really well, and I thought it made sense, especially with such a large ensemble. You're gonna have to divide the group up at some point. I know we all love the dynamic between these characters, but it makes sense with how expansive the show has gotten. You just can't possibly have everyone on screen at once, and I thought it made a lot of sense to do what they end up doing. And the show does find a way to eventually get these characters to different locations. Like Mike, for example, he eventually does go visit 11 for spring break, and what goes down there I can't really get into. We eventually get 11 and her having to go off on her own mission, but again, none of it feels like this is, you know, just something that's shoehorned in there. Nothing feels just too, like, convoluted in that way. It honestly is something that I thought just worked really well for the season, and I think with the story they were trying to tell, you just couldn't possibly have done this all in one location. It made sense to have to branch off a bit and put these characters in different dynamics. I thought they did a really good job with that, and it made for, I think, one of the best parts of this entire season. But like I said, the interpersonal drama is very much still there as well. There's a lot that these characters end up going through this season. There's a lot of dynamics that are explored, and that's something else that I really did appreciate. And like I said, with someone like Vecna that's looming, you know, we get a lot into these characters' insecurities, and maybe what they've kind of like held back from admitting. We do kind of dive deeper into that this season, and that's something that I really did appreciate quite a bit. So I think the writing here overall was really great. Let's talk about the cinematography for this season, because that's something else that I think a lot of people are going to notice. This season just feels so much bigger in terms of cinematography. It feels like because of the fact that they were given that time to really wait on the season, they were given a much bigger budget as a result, and that's because they were. Netflix admitted that they are, every episode is costing them, like, I think they said something around like 90 million or something like that every episode. It's something crazy like that. It's insane how much money they are giving to this show, but it pays off in spades because everything just feels so much more cinematic in that way. When it comes to the different locations that they're in, they all have a very distinctive like color palette to them. When we're in California, everything's much more brighter and colorful. When we're in Russia, everything's a lot more colder. There's a lot of blues and things like that. But then when we're in Hawkins, things just feel a lot darker in that way. Things feel a lot more, again, things feel a lot more sort of, you know, there's these darker hues throughout the season. I just thought they did a really good job when it came to that. But also, the look of Vecna is phenomenal. This is a creature that just looks so tangible, that even though this is, you know, this creature that's, you know, might be from the Upside Down, might be not, still everything about Vecna looks like something that could exist, and I thought they did a really good job with that. It has this like kind of Freddy Krueger look to them, but also very again, very much its own thing, and that's something I really did appreciate when it came to the cinematography here. There are some really impressive horror sequences as well that really just go in some daring directions that I wasn't expecting them to do, so I really enjoyed the cinematography a lot here, particularly, I would say, in the 4th and 7th episode, really do stick out, I think, when it comes to the cinematography. The score as well this season is really great, as it always is, but the soundtrack is also something that really does stick out. There's one song in particular that looms throughout this entire season that you are not going to be able to get out of your head for a very long time. That's all I will say about that. And the editing, let's talk about it. So yeah, I'll address the elephant in the room. Most of these episodes are around like an hour and 15 minutes long, the 7th episode being like an hour 40, and you know, when you look at those episode lengths, you're like, holy shit, like it really catches you off guard. But to be honest, I was actually excited for it because of the nature of the way, you know, the story and the way everything is divided. I feel like this was absolutely the way to go. I love the fact that the Duffer brothers were given this creative freedom to kind of just do what they wanted. They weren't restrained by Netflix or any way, or kind of told like, you can only make it this long, you know, we can't have episodes going on for this amount of time. They were just kind of able to do what they wanted. They really kind of let them let loose, and as a result, we have much longer run times this season, and for me, it really didn't change much. I still felt like these episodes breezed by, but I also felt like we were given a lot more time to dive into some conflicts that I don't think would have been given quite as much focus if we weren't. They're just, everything feels like we are given more, it's given a lot more depth in that way, and I think that, again, if they were to just give us the normal 9 episodes that are around like 15 minutes long, it just wouldn't have worked as well. There's so much that needs to be done this season. There's so much that we need to dive into, so much mythology. There's one episode where we get like 20 minutes of this backstory, and you don't even realize the 20 minutes are passing. You're just so invested in what's going on that you think it's only like 10 minutes, and the fact that they were able to devote so much time is something that I am just so happy about. And my god, the way that this ends, I mean, I have not been this anxious for more Stranger Things in a very long time. I really am happy that they ended up dividing it up in the way that they did, because now there are so many more conclusions that you can draw heading into Volume 2. There's so much that can really go down, and I'm so excited to get more into all of that when we talk about spoilers and whatnot. I will say, the only thing I will say about the editing, this is not a complaint. This is just something I think Netflix missed out on. I do think Netflix kind of like overlooked an opportunity here. I think that though they were trying to do something different with the season, I think they could have done something even more different, which is make each episode weekly. I don't think this season actually is one that deserves to be binged. I think, yeah, it can be very bingeable in that way because it has that Netflix format of like every episode kind of, you know, leading into the next in that way, like a lot of shows do. But I think that this season would be even more impactful if we had that week-to-week wait. There are certain episodes this season where there is so much to process, there's so much that goes down in every single storyline that it really feels like having the option of going to the next one kind of does a disservice to that episode. And I think if Netflix really wanted to test things out, this is really the show to do it. I don't know if they're going to change their ways in season 5 or whatever, but I really hope that they do, because I feel like this is absolutely the kind of show that would benefit from something like that, and I don't think anybody would complain. I think Stranger Things has a big enough fan base to where people would be that much more excited waiting a week to week, but they didn't. We're given the normal, you know, binge model. It's a little bit different this time because the episodes are longer and we're only given 7 episodes. But I just think that if it was weekly, it would have been that much more of this, you know, really just incredible ride that all of us were able to take. There are some moments that do feel a bit too stretched out and maybe would have benefited more from a shorter length, but for the most part, they really do use that longer episode length to their advantage. But now we need to get into spoilers here, which, my god, where do we even start? I think what I'm going to do, just to make this as easy as possible and probably as digestible as possible, is just go from each individual plot line and just kind of go from there, because I don't think there's another way to talk about this without doing that. I will say, If you guys are following my new channel that I'm doing with my girlfriend, A Conversation with Kelly, we're gonna do like a predictions video for season 4, so I'm not gonna get too much into what I think is going to happen for the rest of the season. It's more just gonna be me talking about my thoughts on everything that went down in this first half. I think I'm gonna start with the California crew for a bit. So I really love that this season we got to see an 11 that is much more vulnerable. You know, she is relentlessly bullied. She wants Mike to think she has this great social life, and that's very much not the case because of the fact that, you know, she hasn't really gone to school before or anything like that. She has a really hard time, you know, really kind of like communicating to people, and people are really kind of putting her down for it, and that gives us one of the worst bullies that we have seen in a long time in Angela. My God, I cannot think of a character like this that I have hated in quite some time. I mean, the way that she goes as far as to literally just have her friends like destroy that project that she made dedicated to Hopper, and you know, you think 11's gonna go off on her, and then she doesn't, and then she embarrasses her at the roller rink, and then 11 does the thing with the roller skate that everybody's been memeing up on Twitter. Look, Angela deserved it. She did. Look, yes, her head cracked open and things like that, and like, yes, 11 definitely maybe took it a bit too far, but at the same time, when you are bullying 11 in the way that she is, it's like, at some point, she had it coming for sure. But this does bring out a very interesting layer to Mike, where Mike this season is just generally kind of an asshole to everyone. There's a moment with Will where it seems like they're taking Will in a direction where he has a bit of a crush on Mike. I know the Duffer brothers said they kind of want to leave it up to interpretation, but I felt like it was pretty obvious that Will clearly does have feelings for Mike in that way. He talks about how Mike never sent him letters and things like that, and you can also view it as Will still kind of just being that kid, never really being able to grow up, because I kind of felt like that's what they were doing in season 3, and I still do feel that way here. He's never really had that chance to grow up. His childhood was kind of taken away from him, and Mike is not really, Mike is not really someone that is as a priority. Will is not really a priority to Mike anymore, but, you know, we have that, and then he gets really mad at 11, doesn't really support her, and things like that, and they kind of end things on a bad note, where 11 eventually is called in by Paul Reiser's character, who I didn't know was still around. He kind of got sidelined for a bit, but he is very much alive. Sam Owens, he calls her in to tell her that there is this imminent threat, and that without her, they're not going to be able to take it down. So that kind of ties her into the Vecna of everything. And this also gives us the reintroduction of Dr. Brenner, who is also very much alive, and I like what they're doing with his character. I like the idea that he's going through this kind of, not necessarily redemption arc, but it's getting us to understand him a bit. He feels less like a villain and more of an anti-hero. He is doing something that's kind of unethical, but he's doing it for the right reasons. We don't get a lot with him in this first half, aside from like the flashbacks, but I do like the conversation that him and Owens have, where Owens talks about, like, do we really need to be taking this that far? Is this really just, you know, like a self-preservation thing for you? I thought all of that was really interesting. I'm interested in seeing what they're going to do with this character moving forward, but my God, this leads to some truly painful memories for 11, and just the really just hostile treatment that she was receiving. Didn't really feel like, you know, she was being treated as an equal. We see that all of these all the others that are like her were speaking in unison and things like that, which is really creepy to watch when they're all just kind of like, yes, Papa, in unison. But eventually she ends up connecting to this character. His name, we first knew him as Peter Ballard, and, you know, he's someone who basically, it seemed like at first, is this really, like, kind, orderly and things like that, and, you know, it seems like his character is someone who's going to be very kind to 11, but we'll get more into that when we talk about the Vecna of everything. But that's really what's going on with 11 throughout the rest of the season. You know, she goes through this whole physical transformation, they, like, shave her head and things like that, which I actually liked that idea a lot, because you could see throughout the first 2 episodes she was kind of taking on this younger version of Joyce of sorts with like the longer hair and things like that, and then having to be stripped back to, you know, her original self, someone that she's kind of tried to forget about. She's trying to move on, she's trying to live this normal existence, having to be pulled back into all of that. You know, that's something that Millie Bobby Brown just did such an amazing job with this season. You can see how painful this is for Eleven and how torturous of an experience this is for her, because these are things that she forgot about. She doesn't want to remember them, and her soul gradually, you know, starting to remember all these different details, us at first thinking that she's the one behind this massacre, and then, well, we eventually find out what's going on there. Just brilliant stuff all around. I know a lot of people said that that whole portion of the season was boring, and I just can't understand it. Like, I get it that there's a lot of flashbacks, but this is stuff that we absolutely needed to further get us to connect to this character, to really show, you know, why she doesn't want to remember this part of her life. You know, we're really given a sense of that, I think, throughout this first half of the season. But once Eleven goes off on her own mission, we kind of get this, like I said, buddy comedy of sorts with Will, Jonathan, and Mike, and also this character of Argyle, and this part I was kind of lukewarm on. I enjoyed it because, again, I felt like we needed those comedy bits, but at the same time, I didn't really know how to feel about some of it. I will say Jonathan as a character is someone that I don't really feel like the show knows what to do with right now, so having him have someone in Argyle, someone that he can interact with, he's like this pothead now, it's a fun idea. I don't feel like Argyle's a character that I'm really liking all that much. He's kind of just like comedic relief. He's definitely funny when he's there, but I need him to be more than just simply comedic relief. I need him to have his own sort of ongoing arc. It seems like they're gonna maybe tap into something like that with him finding this girl at Susie's place, which we'll get into that. But the rest of this story is basically, you know, we see these agents show up. It seems like they're gonna, you know, shoot Mike and you know, they're gonna shoot Mike and Will and all of them, but they do thankfully evade them. And eventually they come across this guy. He tells them about the project that Eleven's involved in, but Mike thinks that he's talking about a girl, and they end up tracking down Susie. And look, I love that Susie is incorporated in the season. I knew that she would be in some fashion, but I did feel that this was kind of a pointless diversion. It felt like they needed something to do with these characters, so they brought them to Susie's house, and I understood what the point of this was. I just felt like this was something that went on a little bit too long, with us having this whole thing with Susie, her being in this, what seemed like this home for all these different children. You know, they're like filming videos and things like that, and, you know, they come across Susie, and she eventually does give them the code of what they're looking for, and Argyle stumbles across this girl. There's not really much else to talk about when it comes to that particular story, aside from, like I said, the Mike and Will stuff, and Will kind of, it's seeming like confessing how he has this crush on Mike, and them not really resolving it all that much. I hope that that's a storyline that goes somewhere interesting, because we kind of just cut it off in episode 6. We don't see them in the last one, and I enjoyed what we got, don't get me wrong. Again, right now, it does kind of feel like a placeholder for them eventually, you know, reuniting with 11. I'm sure they're going to eventually find her. I'm sure eventually we'll probably get some rekindling of sorts between Mike and 11. He'll realize the error of his ways, because the Duffer brothers did hint at Finn Wolfhard getting some really emotional material this season, and we definitely have not seen that yet, so I feel like they're deliberately taking this character in this direction. It has nothing to do with, like, Wolfhard's acting or anything like that. This is a deliberate choice, and I'm excited to see this paying off. So I really can't say too much about how I feel about this particular plot line until we get to the rest of the season. This is really just like a neutral story for me. Like, I don't dislike it. It's fun for what it is, but I just don't really know how to feel about it. I think that's something I will be able to come to more of a conclusion of when the season does wrap up. I enjoyed some of the comedy that we did get here. I thought there were definitely some fun moments, but there just isn't a lot more to say about that particular set of stuff. Okay, the next part of the story I want to talk about is everything going on in Russia. Obviously, I'm leaving the Vecna stuff for last because that's the most to talk about out of everything that went down. Let's talk about Russia, because to be honest with you guys, this is the one part of the season that I generally am just kind of struggling with. So we had Hopper presumably die at the end of season 3. I thought it was a pretty good death. We had this really great moment with him and Eleven, him eventually reading this letter to her. It felt like it was a good way to wrap this character up. He kind of saw the error of his ways as this very overprotective father. He decided to sacrifice himself for her. It was a very noble death. But you bring him back here, and it feels like this is what you brought him back for, because the majority of what we get here just isn't particularly interesting to watch. For a while, I just really was not that interested in what was happening here. It's a lot of just the same stuff of, we find out very early on that he escaped basically through going down through this portal of sorts. He ended up getting kidnapped in Russia. He's like, you know, he's basically put through this camp of sorts where he has to do very hard labor, or he is prepping for some kind of fight, and we don't really know what that's all about, but that's the majority of what we do get in his plot line. There's a lot of times where he tries to escape, but then he is found again, and he's put back into working at the camp, and it gets very repetitive. And if this had been like 2 or 3 episodes, I think it would have flowed a lot better, but because of the fact that they want this to go on as long as all of the other storylines, you know, they want to be able to include this as much as they can, it just feels very repetitive. The only moments that really stuck out to me is the moment where he is venting to his friend that, you know, is with him within the camp, and he talks about how, you know, for a while he thought everybody was cursed around him, but he realized that he himself is this, you know, parasitic curse of sorts. Like, whenever he's in someone's lives and he gets close to them, that's when bad things happen. He thinks he is the reasoning for that. And I feel like what they're trying to do with Hopper this season is him trying to turn into this protector of sorts. He wants to fix everything. He wants to make everything better again. He wants to restore this humanity within himself that he thinks he's kind of lost at this point. He's at a point where he seems kind of hopeless, even when he eventually is facing that Demogorgon, which I like. The 7th episode is when I really started to like Hopper's storyline, when we started to get a sense of what was really going on, and him having to go after, you know, the demodogs of sorts, and, you know, we realize that it's coming after him. You know, we don't really know what's exactly happening there. But when he's reunited with Joyce and Murray, you can see that there's this hope that is renewed in him. It's a really amazing feeling to watch, and that's the thing with Hopper. Whenever he's happy, you're happy. But throughout the majority of this, I just found it kind of slow and boring, and I wasn't super into it. And unfortunately, the same does go for Joyce and Murray. I understand that Joyce is very much, you know, hung up over the fact that, you know, Hopper's dead, and she eventually finds this coded message of sorts that kind of, you know, brings up the idea that Hopper's alive, but her and Murray decide to go all the way to Russia without telling her kids, mind you. She just kind of goes off, doesn't let them know any of what's going on when she probably could have helped them out, but I digress. Joyce is kind of sidelined here. She really doesn't have a lot to do after this. We focus a lot more on Murray and his antics of him, you know, knowing Russia, which kind of comes back this season. It feels like they set that up in season 3, so it made sense here. And then he impersonates this character Yuri, and this was all fun to watch, but really that buildup of them eventually reuniting with Hopper, that is what really did excite me. I liked what we ended up getting there, but like I said, this particular plot line just didn't really invest me as much as everything else that was going on. And I think it's because right now, it just feels so disconnected from every other storyline. I don't know how this is going to fit into everything else. I don't see this connecting into anything really until the last episode, and I'm just unsure what's really going to happen from here on out, and I don't know if this story was worth bringing Hopper back for. I'm still indifferent to how to feel about all of that. So right now, it's really the only complaint that I have when it comes to this season. I just don't really love what's going on here. It at points kind of feels like a different show, and I'm just not entirely into it. I get what they're trying to do. It's just right now I just feel very disconnected from what's going on there, aside from a couple scenes. Hopefully they improve upon it in the last 2 episodes, but right now it is easily the storyline that I'm the most lukewarm on. All right, so with that said, let's get into everything going on at Hawkins, which, where to begin? There's so much to really talk about here. I think the first thing I really want to talk about is what they decide to do with all of the kids. I really like the storyline of Lucas this season, and that he is with the popular crowd, and it's kind of driven this wedge with their friendships. We see that because Max is so closed off, she's kind of broken up with Lucas, but Lucas still very much does care for her. He's never really lost that care that he has, but those two are apart. We see that, Lucas is kind of like diverted from the group a bit, even though, he doesn't really think he has. It's a very interesting dynamic, what they decided to do there, and I like that early on he does make the choice to go with his friends. He doesn't go through this season-long arc of him, abandoning the group. It just wouldn't make sense for Lucas. That's out of character. He's always been very loyal. He's always cared about his friends. It wouldn't make sense for him to go off with these jocks of sorts, many of which are just so, unbearable to watch in the best way. They're meant to be. Jason's meant to be this, really ignorant character, and I think he serves his purpose well as that. But what we end up getting besides that is this series of killings that go on within Vecna, and all of those were so interesting to watch. Chrissy's in particular, the first one that we get, really just caught me off guard. I was not expecting for the show to go to the places that it does. We get straight up body horror this season with the body, with Chrissy's body contorting in all these weird directions. We get to see her mom kind of taunting her for having this eating disorder of sorts, and her wishing that her mom treated her better. And all of that was just so well done when Eddie goes to her and he's telling her to wake up, but she's not waking up, and now Eddie's the one framed for everything. The setup for Vecna, all of that is fantastic. I loved what they ended up doing with the start of that. I thought it was just such a compelling mystery that we get from here on out, because again, we've never seen a threat like this within the Upside Down. It's not like Chrissy is possessed by Vecna. Vecna straight up kills her and feeds on, again, those insecurities, feeds on the worries and the scares that these characters have. I really loved seeing that, within a villain. That's what makes Vecna so compelling in that way. I've seen people compare Vecna to Pennywise, and it's very similar, to how Pennywise feeds on those fears that everyone has. Vecna feeds on the insecurities. Vecna feeds on the guilt that these characters have around them, and I found that to be a very compelling antagonist of sorts, because, there's so much you can do with that, and especially when it comes to Max this season, who, like I said, so masterfully written. I love what they do with her early on, where she's talking to her guidance counselor, and she wants to help her out, but Max is just so closed off at this point. And for a while this season, she's very closed off. A lot of the time, she's just wearing headphones, listening to Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, which I love how that looms throughout the entire season, and you kind of look at it differently towards the 4th episode. But what they end up doing with her this season, where, she gets to a point where she starts to realize, oh my god, she's gonna be the next victim of Vecna. She sees the clocks. She starts to see, where Vecna's sort of, sanctuary and things like that, which is not the Upside Down. It's something much more grislier than that. And when she's pulled in by Vecna, she reads that letter to Billy. You see her kind of pour her entire heart out, and eventually Billy turns into Vecna, and Billy talks about how, Max hated Billy and wanted nothing to do with Billy, and kind of hints at the fact that maybe Max herself wanted to die. And when Vecna eventually grabbed Max in that episode, I really did think that she was a goner, and it was so riveting to watch. From the moment that Max is reading that letter to where she's running away from Vecna, I was glued to the screen. I mean, Dear Billy is as great as everyone has said, but it's mainly because of that whole, like, 20-minute sequence, which that's something I loved about this season, is that sequences like that go on much longer than they usually would, and it's all the better for it. You know, when she's seeing all those memories of all of her friends, I mean, I really was tearing up at that point, and when she eventually is alive, it's just such a relief, and I love the way that entire sequence was done when it comes to Max and her guilt, you know, and her just feeling grief-stricken about Billy, wishing that they could have connected, wishing that they could have had a much better relationship. You know, that's what really drives her character this season, is her kind of reflecting upon the hostile relationship she had with Billy, never really considering him a brother, but always secretly wishing that, you know, they could have had that relationship. I just thought was such a beautiful moment. And what they do with her moving forward is that now we got to save Max. You know, we know that Vecna's been after Max. Now we got to make sure that Vecna doesn't come after anyone else. And I love how this seems like it's reconnecting Lucas and Max when he's talking to her about how, you know, he loves Kate Bush now because, you know, she saved her. I mean, it's such a beautiful moment with that, and I do definitely see them probably getting back together. I think that's probably what they're going to hint at. But also when it comes to Nancy this season, I love the dynamic that she had with Robin, as I said. It was very unexpected at first, but I really did love it when they are impersonating these, you know, when they're impersonating these secretaries of sorts, and they're trying to get information out of Creel. I mean, that whole sequence is so good. Robin complaining about how the clothing she's wearing makes her boobs too tight and things like that. Stuff like that is just really funny, and Maya Hawke just is so great delivering as that character. Even her whole, like, little subplot with her liking this girl but not knowing if the girl is actually out as a lesbian but wanting to pursue her, like, stuff like that, you just really find yourself latching onto. But what I really love about their whole dynamic is it never feels like this played out love triangle, because, you know, they really do push the fact that Steve and Robin have this platonic friendship, and it's just so refreshing to watch. These two really do support each other, these two really do love each other, but they really are just friends, and in doing so, it kind of gives Nancy and Steve a chance to kind of rekindle, because they never really have been able to since season 1. You know, Nancy has never truly forgiven Steve for what has happened, and it feels like that's where we're headed in season 4, that these two are going to have this rekindling of sorts. They are going to kind of, you know, admit their faults of the past and maybe try to move forward. I don't see them getting these two together. I've heard people hint at that. I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think we need to see Nancy and Jonathan reunited first, which if they end up doing that, I think we're going to see them reunite, and then something's going to go wrong, and then she's going to go to Steve. But I do see them rekindling. I think that's where they really are headed. But the moment where Steve has to go through this pool, and he has to basically, you know, track down, he has to try to stop Vecna himself, and you see him attacked in the Upside Down with those tentacles. I mean, that's another moment where you think Steve's going to be a goner. I didn't actually think he was going to die there just because of the way that it ended. I didn't think they'd kill Steve off in such a unceremonious manner to where at the end of the next episode he'd be dead. I just didn't think they'd do that. So I was happy to see that he ended up alive. But the big thing to talk about is, of course, you know, in the finale, all 4 of these characters get trapped in the Upside Down. Steve, Robin, Eddie, and Nancy, respectively. And I do think this is hinting at one of these 4 characters dying. And I think it's going to be Nancy. I think that's very much what they're hinting at. I think Nancy has a lot of emotional baggage that she hasn't fully unpacked. Yes, she got justice for Barb, but I think in the back of her mind, she's always had that guilt. It's always been kind of festering, and I think the moment where she comes across Vecna and she's in, you know, she's in Barb's pool and things like that. I mean, it really feels like this full circle moment for Nancy, where she's gone from just wanting justice for her friend to now feeling guilty for it. I thought was a really great moment. I don't think Nancy's gonna die like in the beginning of part 2, but I could potentially see them killing her off in the end. Again, I'm going to talk about that more in like predictions, but I really love the way that whole sequence played out, and Erica also being in on what's happening with Vecna, I was very happy about, because Erica's not in part 1 a lot. But now that she knows, I have a feeling she's going to get a little bit more in on the act. She has more of an idea of what's going on now. So I feel like Erica's probably going to become a more essential part of the season. Maybe she'll possibly get swept up by Vecna. We'll see some of her insecurities. I'm interested in seeing how that's going to play out moving forward. But I would also be remiss if I did not talk about everything going on with Eddie as a character, because like I said, he is falsely accused for everything that has gone down, and everyone seems to think that he's part of like this crazy like satanic cult. I don't know what the hell's gonna happen there, but I think that this is probably gonna give Karen Wheeler a much bigger role, because she is now a part of this resistance of sorts against Eddie and his whole group. I think what's going to happen here is that Jason is going to remain very ignorant, and he's going to be pulled in by Vecna, and he's basically going to be killed because of that, but we'll really just have to see how that does play out. We do have to talk about the Creel house, though. I loved this entire sequence where we find out about Victor Creel, brilliantly played by Robert Englund. Like, that's the definition of like a small role that really makes the most of it. Robert Englund was perfectly cast for that, but when he's talking about how, this family moved in like the 50s and everything seemed okay at first, but then, this, demonic presence was terrorizing them and ended up killing almost the entire family. It left him blind and all this stuff. You think for a while he might be the one at fault, that he, is that he may be the one at fault here, that it's probably Victor Creel. But then we got to circle back, of course, to the adventures of 11 and Peter Ballard, or 1, as we eventually known him as. I really loved what they did with this whole story, because I fully believed that, Ballard's intentions were nothing but positive. He generally saw, the place that 11 was in and saw this as this prison of sorts, that they were, holding her hostage and that they needed to get away. And I really did believe him up to the point where we realize that he is the one that's killing everyone. He is responsible for the massacre. And the way that 11 just switches in that moment from seeing Peter as someone that is this, trusted ally of sorts, seeing him as one of her own, someone that she could possibly team up with, to basically this, someone who's just as bad, even worse than Brenner, was such an amazing moment. And him going off on this whole speech about how, he wants to destroy all of humanity, and, he wants to rebuild the world and things like that, and he wants her to join him. Again, Amy Campbell Bower just killed this entire scene. I loved the way that this was done, and 11 openly refusing to do that, really I feel like is the moment where she chose to be a hero. She chose to do good in that way, and her opening this portal, shooting him through it into the Upside Down. I saw some people think maybe this is how the Upside Down was created, but I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. But we see him go through the Upside Down, and then he eventually transforms into what we now know as Vecna. So it turns out Vecna was actually Henry Creel all along. It was not Victor Creel, it was the son of Victor Creel. Such a great twist, like such an amazing twist, and I really love where they end up going with this. I think this was so well planned. This is something where, and this was the perfect point to end it, because now what you can do is go through this season again and see if, how they really did plant the seed for this reveal, where those clues were and things like that. I thought they did such an amazing job with that reveal here, seeing, the one tattoo on his arm still being there. Just so masterfully handled the way they did that, and I cannot wait to see what's going to happen, because now we realize how much more involved 11 is in all this. This isn't just some random entity. It feels like, from what we're seeing, Vecna may have been the one behind it all along. Vecna, we thought for a while, was like subservient to the Mind Flayer, but I feel like it might be the other way around, that maybe Vecna was the one controlling everything. Vecna was the greater evil, and the Mind Flayer was simply just Vecna's servant. I'm interested in seeing more of what's going on there. There's so much more they can do moving forward in terms of all these, you know, different ideas with Vecna and how much more personal this is for 11, how she's going to get roped into everything, but also maybe dive deeper into some of these characters' insecurities. I do see a major character dying in the second half of this season. I definitely do see that happening, and I think it's going to be a one that sticks. I don't think this is going to be like a Hopper where it's like a fake out of some sort. I think we are going to see a character die here. I think that, you know, we're eventually going to see the California crew come in there. I don't know how the Russia crew is going to get there, but they're going to get there somehow. I'm sure we're going to see all of that unfold, but I am just anxiously awaiting to see how this is all going to play out on July 1st when second half does come out. So overall, guys, Stranger Things Season 4 Volume 1 is a very bold season of television. It takes the show to new heights in ways that we just haven't really seen explored before. It's a lot more dense. It feels way more cinematic, really diving deeper into the horror aspects of the show. It has amazing performances from everyone, but Millie Bobby Brown and especially Sadie Sink really do run away with the show this season. At points, it can feel a little bit played out with some plot lines, and there are points where I'm not entirely sure where they are going, but considering how bold and different this season really was, and the direction we end off in especially, I am so excited to see where we do end up going moving forward. There are a lot of things that I'm unsure about, but I think are definitely, I'm going to have a little bit more clarity on within the last 2 episodes of this season. Some of the episode lengths may overwhelm you at first. You may not know how to feel about them, but trust me when I say it was very much warranted. We get a lot more time with these characters and their dynamics, and it very much, I think, is going to pay off in the end. I really do love where this season is going, and I think if they're able to keep it up, I think this could potentially become the best season of Stranger Things that we have seen yet. I absolutely love pretty much everything about this season. There are a couple things, like I said, that I'm a bit iffy on, but aside from that, I really just love what they are doing with Stranger Things moving forward. I'm so excited to see where the rest of Season 4 does go, and if I did have to rate Season 4 Volume 1, I am going to give it an A. Oh my god, I am just anxiously awaiting to see how everything does end up playing out for the rest of this season. But that's it for my review, the first half of Stranger Things Season 4. Let me know what you guys saw of this season so far overall. Left your thoughts on all of that. Like I said, I am going to be doing a predictions video of sorts the week before Volume 2 comes out. Very excited to do that with my beautiful girlfriend Allie and some of our friends as well. So excited for you guys to check that out when it does happen. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.